What's up, everyone? It's Matt Martin with the Grass Factor. So we're moving into that time of year where we are all going to be dealing with broadleaf weeds. So what I wanted to do was put together a video looking at data from multiple different universities and building the ultimate guide to broadleaf weed controls. So bear with me, let's jump into this. So the big goal of this whole video here is I want to talk about what's currently available on the market. It's a popular thing I like to talk about. We want to talk about how they're formulated, how formulations are going to impact the overall performance of the active ingredient, and we're going to talk about different kickers, things we can add to our tank mixes to get overall greater efficacy. And we're going to be talking about surfactants or no surfactants, and then finally we'll sum it up with which one is actually the best. So while we're looking at the AIs and ingredients here, this is a pretty comprehensive list of different things that are out there. Like the Lesco 3-way that we see over here and the triplet that you see down here. There's about 75 different formulations of that single product alone. I put those two on there, but as you can see, all of these can really be summed up into just a few active ingredients. And these active ingredients are going to target our broadleaf weeds. These are synthetic auxins, and most popularly, you're going to see 2,4-D, dicamba, mecaprop, FLUROXYPYR, and TRICLOPYR. You might get some MCPA in there to take the place of 2,4-D. If you've ever paid attention to the 3-way label, you will see you can only do 2 blanket applications of 3-way in a season. So what a lot of people will do to get that third blanket application, say you do 2 in the spring, you're going to do 1 in the fall for a cleanup, you will switch to something that contains MCPA in lieu of 2,4-D. So we also have our 4-way herbicides, and typically these are marketed as being even more powerful. And Momentum, that's going to be another Lesco product, 4-Speed NXT, which is my favorite. We've got Q4 Plus and T-Zone, which are probably my least favorite. Surge, which I'm definitely not a big fan of, and Speed Zone, which I am a fan of. So it all comes down to which one's going to perform best, right? So we're going to talk first about the Lesco 3-way, Vessel, Trimec, Triplet SF, what exactly those are. They're amine formulations. And the advantage of using something like an amine is the fact that it is less volatile. Volatilization can occur in higher temperatures. The herbicide can actually convert to a gas and drift off target. For those of you that are new to the industry or are dabbling in the industry, drift is a very serious thing. It can take out trees that are across the street, even though you did everything you were supposed to do. So when you see these products, typically like Lesco 3-way, Vessel, Trimec, pay attention to your formulation. Is it an amine formulation? Is it a salt of dichloro something, 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 something? When you see that salt of something something acid, that tells you that is an amine formulation. On the flip side, what we will see is an ester formulation. So I point out Change Up right here, which is a combination of an amine and an ester. Esters are typically derived from petroleum distillates. Petroleum distillate being almost like an oil-based type product. It does a better job of penetrating leaf tissue. That oil can solubilize lipids on the outer surface of plant, and as it does, it will allow for easier movement of that herbicide into plant tissue. Esters can vaporize very, very easily. The volatility level on something like an ester can get you in trouble given the right conditions. Esters do have greater overall efficacy, but because of their nature and because of that petroleum distillate base, you have a higher potential for off-target injury. So if you're going out and you're attempting to spray a fescue yard with a 2,4-D ester and it's 85 degrees outside, yes, you will do a good job of killing the weeds, but you will probably cause some pretty significant injury. Also, if it's 85 degrees and you're spraying it, you have a very high probability of volatility too. So chances are you'd also be causing harm to landscape plants even. But I just kind of wanted to bring that up there to pay attention on your labels, the exact formulation you have. Typically, you want to run amine formulations the warmer it is outside. Running an ester in cooler weather, what you're allowing to have happen is the utilization of that petroleum distillate, that ester formulation, to do the heavy lifting when it's cool outside. When it's warm outside, you can switch to something like an amine because you're able to rely on the physical temperature outside, the environmental temperature, to give you that added push, to give you that greater overall efficacy. Because most herbicides are going to have more power the warmer it is outside. Things are actively growing. That means things can move into the plant more quickly. You'll have open pore spaces on the plant that can move some of these materials. So again, always consult your label to understand what exact formulation of herbicide you're working with. So if we look here, we've got Escalade 2, Horsepower, Cool Power, and Momentum FX2. We're going to talk about these particular formulations. What do you see in there that is different than the others that we looked at? You see the FLUROXYPYR and the TRICLOPYR. TRICLOPYR and FLUROXYPYR are still synthetic auxins. They have greater knockdown power on things with woody tissue. Typically, you will find them as esters, and the reason being is that the salt formulation, like an amine, remember we talked about salt of, it doesn't do a good job of penetrating the plant. So, in order to guarantee that higher penetrative power, you will see them formulated as an ester. You'll see some special acid formulations like Helena's Tricera. It is not quite an amine formulation. They work on a very specific acid to reduce the volatility compared to a traditional ester formulation, but that's not to say it's completely volatility free. It's just reduced. The other thing is, as the ester formulation, you need to be careful when you're applying around water. Amine formulations of TRICLOPYR, like the Garlon 3, can be used as an aquatic herbicide. However, the ester formulation is incredibly toxic to aquatic wildlife, so pay attention to your storm drains. This is really what I wanted to look at right here. So this is going to be a performance chart, and we're looking at several of the active ingredients we see. This particular weed they're spraying in this study is wild violet. I can say everybody has a tough time controlling wild violets. So what this trial does, it shows how repeat applications and different formulations applied to wild violets result in, well, different means of efficacy. And what's interesting here is our most popular herbicides that are used here, 2,4-D-amine, 2,4-D-ester, 2,4-D-DP, also known as dichloroprop, overall aren't that very effective. So if we are looking at the epidasty, which would be the curling factor that takes place where, you know how when you spray an auxin-based herbicide, you'll get that curling look to it where, you know, some people will say that you're growing the plant to death, and you are, but you're growing it irregularly to the point of death. And you can see you're not really getting a whole lot of that curling and twisting action with your three different 2,4-D formulations. And then if we look at the regrowth over at 84 days after application, we can see that, you know, almost half of the plant has recovered by that time. So overall, not very effective. We look at MCPP, Mecaprop, and MCPA. MCPA, little better overall efficacy, but still not great. Then we move into quinclorac. Quinclorac has wild violets on the label, but as you can see here, you do get some decent knockdown at the 42 days after initial application. However, at 84 days, you're not very effective still. We move on to TRICLOPYR here, and TRICLOPYR, they do it in split applications of 1 pound of active ingredient followed by 1 pound of active ingredient. And if we look, we are really starting to make some headway. That is almost complete control that we see there. That is really, really good. You can see almost 96% of the plant was dead on that first run at 42 days after initial application. So we can see here TRICLOPYR is an incredibly heavy lifter when attempting to control wild violets. Now, we start adding in things like 2,4-D and TRICLOPYR and quinclorac. Until you throw the TRICLOPYR into the mix, you're not getting that great level of control. And it's interesting that even though you have the multiple modes of actions there, you tend to get just about equal efficacy as TRICLOPYR by itself. And we move on to here, where we're going to switch it up between different rates of 2,4-D and TRICLOPYR. Just stick to those two. Again, we're still getting really good control. It's hard to say if that would be too statistically different than TRICLOPYR by itself. But, you know, when you're at 93 and 88% control at 42 days after application, you know, that's pretty good. So here we're going to throw some new active ingredients into the mix and see how it affects ground ivy. And I've kind of highlighted the best performing ones here. 2,4-D ester is working exceptionally well. You know, we're getting down to 18% coverage of ground ivy after a few applications there. Escalade 2 is doing pretty well. One of the front runners for sure. Then we look at Spotlight. Spotlight is a single source FLUROXYPYR. And you can see in one instance, in fall applications, you're doing pretty good, but in spring applications, you're not doing great. And we look down at Turflawn ester. Turflawn ester is TRICLOPYR. We saw how effective TRICLOPYR was on wild violets. But now, with ground ivy, you see you do not have anywhere near the efficacy that you had on wild violets on ground ivy. And to even take it a little further, we have an instance here of T-zone. T-zone is going to contain TRICLOPYR and some other kickers. It'll have some 2,4-D, dicamba, and also sulfentrazone in it. And you can see it performed about like TRICLOPYR did by itself. So overall, our two big winners on this one would be, I'm not going to talk about Imprellis because Imprellis is off the market, but Escalade 2 and 2,4-D ester are the big winners. FLUROXYPYR, just by default here, is showing a little more efficacy when fall applications are made than TRICLOPYR during the fall. But in the spring, it looks like TRICLOPYR is actually doing a little bit better than FLUROXYPYR does in the spring. So we're beginning to see how the formulation, the active ingredient, and the timing of the application can all alter the overall efficacy of your weed management program. So we're going to move into here where we've got Spotlight, and we're going to combine it with a 2,4-D amine. Spotlight, again, was FLUROXYPYR and a 2,4-D amine. So we're talking about an ester formulation and combined with an amine formulation and spraying dandelions and also white clover with sequential applications. And as you can see, we're doing really well pretty much across the board. But if we look at Spotlight in single applications, it doesn't do exceptionally well on dandelions. However, white clover seems to do great. Then we follow up with the other herbicides, and you can see what a difference it makes there. So we look at 2,4-D amine 4 at 2 pints per acre. It does fairly well, great even on dandelion control, but look at how well it does on white clover. It didn't do well at all. And it wasn't until you added that FLUROXYPYR kicker did you really start maximizing your overall control. Here we are. We're going to take that same weed list and we're going to look at TRICLOPYR and 2,4-D. So we're looking at Chaser and how that looks on plantains 14 days after treatment and 60 days after treatment. Dandelions, you see it's absolutely smoking it. White clover, smoking it. And mouse ear chickweed, doing a really good job. Okay, but we start changing formulations over to 2,4-D and FLUROXYPYR with a little bit of dicamba in it. And you can see we're almost, if we are at 99% control against plantains, dandelions, white clover, and mouse ear chickweed with that combination. that would be something really similar to like an Escalade 2. You could see that is superior control. Then we're going to mix it up with 2,4-D ester, TRICLOPYR, and dicamba. And you can see that is absolutely slaying it. Then we're going to follow up with the same application behind with a little bit different rates. We're going even higher rates on all across the board, and we are, right there at 100% control. And most people run like just a generic triplet SF, right? So that would be your typical 3-way product. And here it's applied at 3.5 pints per acre. I would say that's 4 pints per acre, I believe, is single app max rate. And so we look here, and we're at 99% control on plantain, 92% control on dandelion. We are at 99% control on white clover, 92% on mouse-ear chickweed. It does exceptionally well. It doesn't do quite as well as 2,4-D FLUROXYPYR and dicamba, but it does do exceptionally well. And we see just the 2,4-D and TRICLOPYR by itself up top does good, but it doesn't do great. So there is something to say about that formulation, like triplet, that contains 2,4-D, dicamba, and mecaprop, that will give you greater overall efficacy. But clear, the winner here would be something that contains 2,4-D, FLUROXYPYR, and dicamba. However, if you're dealing with wild violets, you are not going to want to use strictly something that contains FLUROXYPYR. You want to include that TRICLOPYR, or do even a TRICLOPYR only app. So it's one thing to keep in mind when you're reaching into the toolbox about what you're actually going to use. So we'll talk a little bit about kickers. So on those 4-way herbicides I was showing you earlier, the big advantage there is that they all contain kickers. Typically, you'll see kickers come in different forms, like TRICLOPYR could be considered a kicker, FLUROXYPYR could be considered a kicker, but most often you see sulfentrazone, you see quicksilver, and you see octane. Pyrofluvyl ethyl is in the same family and is almost exactly the same in terms of function and performance as quicksilver. So when it comes to choosing between the two, typically you want to pick whichever one would be cheapest for you. I personally like octane with herbicide blends, and if I'm using something that is going to require specifically quicksilver, then I'll use quicksilver. But in reality, you're not going to see a difference between the two. One is not going to be better than the other. It is dead nuts, middle of the road. Most kickers are PPOIs, so keep that in mind. They're all in the same family. Sulfentrazone, carfentrazone, octane, they're all in the same family. They're typically known as offering a faster burn down when you spray them, but one of the unknown that's talked about less is the amount of duration of control they can give you. It's almost like a residual type control that you get from including these PPOIs. So I've included this on here purely for demonstration. Please do not attempt this with fescue or Bermuda grass. This is a buffalo grass trial, but I thought it painted a pretty good picture as to the duration that kickers can apply to your weed controls. So if we look at the different herbicides that are applied at the time of seeding buffalo grass, you can see it made at the time of emergence, that's 0 weeks after emergence, and then an application made 2 weeks after emergence. Look at which products give you the greatest performance in overall weed coverage. So in this chart, the lower the better. Applications made at seeding of sulfentrazone and quinclorac outperformed something like prodiamine. Mesotrione did really well, but look at sulfentrazone and quinclorac. That duration effect, you get the knockdown from it and the duration effect. So something like prodiamine, I think this does a really good job of painting the picture that it needs to be applied early. It is not something that needs to be applied late. And if we look at even the time of emergence, sulfentrazone and quinclorac did exceptionally well when compared to prodiamine when these checks were monitored. So again, I say all this just to paint the picture that when you're making your selection on what you're going to be spraying, it may be something that you do want to include that kicker in, because it will give you that extended control duration. So we'll talk a little bit about surfactants too, right? And I'm going to first talk about crop oil concentrates and methylated seed oils. They're going to do an exceptional job of penetrating this embedded wax and this epicuticular wax. So being that it is an oil and lipids are soluble in oil, that it can begin to break this down. So as it does, that will allow easier movement of herbicide into the plant through the leaf tissue. And if we look at a non-ionic surfactant, of how that would work is it will disperse the water across the leaf surface. So instead of beading that we see down here, it will distribute it much better across that leaf surface. So in some instances, when you're deciding which one to go with, if you're dealing with broadleaf weeds that are not normally thick with that waxy surface, then a non-ionic surfactant may be better. But if you're dealing with something that is like a crop oil concentrate, or if you're dealing with something that does have really waxy leaf surfaces, wild violet, ground ivy, it may behoove you, depending on the formulation of the herbicide you're using, is it an amine, is it an ester, to combine it with a crop oil concentrate. If you're running an ester, you typically do not need to apply it with a crop oil concentrate. You're getting your oil portion of your spray solution from the formulation of the herbicide you selected. If you're using an amine-based formulation, it may be something that you want to include a crop oil concentrate to help that penetrative power. But again, remember, the more damage you do, the more you choose an herbicide or an adjuvant or a surfactant that will break down that waxy layer, it will be non-selective. So it will also allow herbicide to move into your desirable turf species equally as easily. And that may mean more damage to your actual grass. And when we look here at just the amount of absorption that occurs from the different surfactant blends we have here, so we show the greatest uptake of an herbicide comes with a crop oil concentrate plus a fertilizer. But right behind it, a non-ionic surfactant and fertilizer is right there. It's almost to the point where it's not statistically different. So you don't have to get too hung up on these different things. You'll see more and more things like organosilicones coming into the market that are going to increase efficacy. The organosilicones are just going to be super, super slick surfactants. So it will work a little bit like a crop oil concentrate, but due to its particle size, it is just going to be a great surfactant, right? It's extremely expensive. But I think also what shows here is the advantage you get from including fertilizer into the mix. By including the fertilizer into the mix, you see you still get greater uptake. So when you're choosing what to go out with, when you're choosing your surfactant blend, it may behoove you to throw, if you got a 100-gallon spray tank, it may behoove you to throw a 10 or 20 pound rate of ammonium sulfate in there. And what that will do is condition the water to drop the pH of your total solution, and being that it's nitrogenous, it will help accelerate that uptake. So again, just to highlight this, remember, with greater absorption of herbicides, that means greater potential for injury on your desirable plant species, whether that be fescue or Bermuda or centipede or St. Augustine. So keep that in mind. Not all herbicides are compatible with oils. Always consult your label. Understand what's going to be hygroscopic and what's not. Glyphosate in particular is not going to be compatible with oil, but you can see greater efficacy with glyphosate when applied with a nitrogenous fertilizer as well as a non-ionic surfactant, depending on the formulation of glyphosate you're using. And a lot of this will be spelled out in the label, but it will be difficult to find in the label. So you're going to have to read it 2 or 3 times to understand exactly where it's being talked about and what's suggested. So before we start talking about the contact me part of this, I said I would talk about what is the best. And the answer is that there is no best. You know, I personally like 4Speed XT because of its flexibility and the kicker factor that comes with octane. I think a lot of what NuFarm does, I think NuFarm does a pretty exceptional job of putting out multiple formulations of different active ingredients that will give you that overall greater result. And I think a lot of it comes down to is being able to identify what weeds you are typically going to have an issue with and making your herbicide selection based off that. I think the big thing I wanted to point out here in this video is that even the difference of level of control you'll get between wild violet and ground ivy just from the difference of using FLUROXYPYR versus TRICLOPYR on those 2 particular weeds. All right, everybody, I appreciate you tuning in. I hope y'all learned something today. Y'all take it easy.